Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. A man is arrested and charged with murder days after a Japanese chef was stabbed to death in Vancouver's Chinatown. Plus, the political fallout after BC United drops a candidate over views on the war in Gaza and the LGBTQ+ community. And
they're going into the environmentally sensitive area just to be able to set up their own quiet family activity, right? Or their meal or whatever. But that doesn't mean it's okay.
For the birds, conservationists want the city of Surrey to crack down on people ignoring a sensitive ecological area.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. We begin with an arrest and charge in last week's stabbing death in Vancouver's Chinatown. The victim was a chef at a prominent downtown restaurant, and police now say they don't believe he knew the suspect. Tanya Fletcher joins us now with more. Tanya, remind us who the victim is.
Yeah, in this case, Dan, is Wataru Kakeuchi, 32 years old, a Japanese citizen. And reaction to his death was swift. You may remember Mayor Ken Sim came out right away calling it a senseless act of violence. Now, the victim was found injured near Union and Main in the middle of the night exactly 1 week ago. He died before he could be taken to the hospital. He'd worked as a chef at the popular Hapa Izakaya restaurant in Yaletown. His friends and coworkers described him as a talented musician who is always kind and funny.
A guy that loved our city, our country. Words can't describe how sad we are. It always seems to be the good ones we lose, and he was a beauty.
Now, within hours of Kakeuchi being identified as the victim, loved ones gathered at the scene of his stabbing for a vigil to honor and remember him. They say he had been waiting on a new work permit to continue working at that restaurant. The Japanese consulate, meanwhile, tells us it has been working with police here and contacting his family members in Japan over the past week.
And Tanya, what do we know about the suspect?
The suspect, Dan, also 32 years old, Timothy Isborn. Police say he previously spent time in Alberta before coming to Vancouver in recent years, and he was arrested on the downtown east side on Monday, and now he's been charged with second-degree murder. Vancouver police say investigators have been working around the clock to solve this one.
Well, this was absolutely the highest priority investigation for the Vancouver Police Department. There was a murder that occurred in our community, and a suspect who was outstanding, suspect who had not been identified, and we understand that that leads to a significant amount of concern in the community.
Now, police are still trying to figure out the motive here, but they are investigating this as a possible random attack since they don't believe the two knew each other in this case. Now, generally, second-degree murder is defined as a deliberate killing that takes place without planning. The suspect's first court appearance, Dan, is scheduled for June 20th.
Tanya Fletcher reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Tanya. A BC man has now been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 12 years after being convicted of killing his girlfriend and dumping her body in the woods near Salmon Arm in 2016. Ashley Simpson's remains were found nearly 6 years later after Derek Favell confessed to officers during an undercover sting. The CBC's Brady Strachan is in Salmon Arm with more.
It's been a long and painful journey for Ashley Simpson's family. 9 of them traveled from Ontario to be in Salmon Arm for the sentencing of Ashley's killer.
Something like this affects so hard. People do not realize it. Not only our family, his family too.
In 2016, Ashley Simpson was living in a trailer on a rural property near Salmon Arm with her boyfriend, Derek Favell. But then she disappeared. For nearly 6 years, her father, John, and other members of her family made trips to BC to search for her, to no avail.
When they came home from searching,
oh yeah, that's bad.
The guilt they felt for not bringing her home to me.
Year after year.
That broke my heart more.
Then, in 2021, Ashley's remains were found.
Stop, Trevor.
She had been dumped down an embankment in a forested area by Favell. Today, the court heard details of how the RCMP located her remains and how they got Favell to confess to murdering her. RCMP investigators used what's called a Mr. Big operation, where an undercover officer who posed as a member of a gang befriended Fayvel. Fayvel was eager to join the fake criminal gang and do whatever they asked. The judge called him an easy mark, desperate for their friendship and trust. And eventually, Fayvel confessed to them how he strangled Ashley in their trailer, first with his hands and then with a towel. Fayvel was sentenced today to life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 12 years.
I'm glad that my daughter up above has got the justice she deserves, which is what we really did. That's what we wanted. We wanted justice for Ashley.
Although the sentence puts an end to the court proceedings, Simpson says the grief caused by Ashley's loss will never end.
The younger ones don't remember her. And they cry to me saying, Noni, I don't remember Auntie Ashley. I look at the pictures, I know we had fun, but I don't remember it. And I said, your heart remembers it though. Well, yeah, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
The family says all they have left now are photos of Ashley and memories of her adventurous spirit and her love for the children in her life. Brady Strachan, CBC News, Salmon Arm.
As we told you last night, BC United has dropped a provincial candidate over views on the war in Gaza and the LGBTQ+ community. It's led to questions about Kevin Falcon's leadership amid sagging poll numbers. As the CBC's Katie DeRosa reports, the move has left the party scrambling for a new candidate in a key riding.
The fallout continues after the president of the BC Muslim Association was dropped as a candidate for BC United yesterday. Asad Gondal was introduced Sunday as the party's candidate for Surrey North. However, concerns were raised about past letters Gondal had signed as the association's president. One letter called the war in Gaza a genocide. Another said same-sex marriage and trans identity goes against his religious beliefs. Gondal would not appear on camera Wednesday, but he said in a statement his views were well known before he was asked to join the party. A political strategist who worked on Falcon's leadership campaign said the misstep was not a failure in vetting, but a failure in judgment.
This view that we can get one Muslim at this mosque, we can get all the Muslims. It doesn't work that way. The community's much more, is not that homogenous.
Falcon said in a statement he terminated Gondal's candidacy after he refused to adhere to the party's values. One political watcher said, while it's important for BC United to attract diverse candidates, Gondal's views were too extreme for the party.
Particularly when part of BC United's strategy is to go after BC Conservatives on those sorts of issues. It was, I think, inevitable that Mr. Gondal was going to be a sacrificial lamb here.
By dropping him, Gondal says BC United has damaged its relationship with the Muslim community. This is the first time BC United has had to fire a candidate. But it's yet another blow to a party that's polling third place behind the upstart BC Conservatives. The BC Conservatives have already snatched away 2 MLAs from the official opposition, Eleanor Sturko and Lauren Dirksen. BC United is now left to recruit a new candidate in a key battleground riding 4 months out from the election. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Vancouver.
Police say a motorcyclist has been killed after a crash near the Massey Tunnel in Delta early this morning. Mounties say a rider ran into a car and fell onto the road. They were then injured by the rear wheels of a semi-truck and died. This all happened around 6 in the morning. Highway Patrol says the truck driver didn't stay at the scene and may not know what happened. Police want to speak with any witnesses or anyone with dash cam footage. The crash snarled traffic for hours on Highway 99. And in another crash, police now say a BC driver has died after a rock crashed through her windshield last week on Highway 1 in Burnaby near the Willingdon exit. Investigators are trying to figure out where that stone may have come from. Again, police want to speak with any witnesses or anyone who has dash cam footage. Canada's Environment Minister faced questions over the federal court's ruling that he broke the law when he waited 8 months to recommend an emergency order to protect BC's endangered spotted owls.
Since that court ruling was just issued, we will obviously be looking at it very closely to see how we need to respond.
Guilbeault had been asked whether he would be looking to appeal that decision. Environmentalists argued the delay was unlawful and unreasonable, something the federal judge agreed with. The judge said Guilbeault had decided that the species faced imminent threats months before he made a formal recommendation. Canada's immigration minister, meanwhile, is biting back at our premier after David Eby criticized Ottawa for giving Quebec money to support a surge in asylum seekers. Eby slammed the feds for, as he put it, showering cash and resources on eastern provinces at the expense of western ones. Mark Miller says if BC wants more cash for newcomers, it ought to accept more refugees.
To compensate Quebec for 2 fiscal years of costs they've incurred with respect to the disproportionate flow of asylum seekers. So, we need provinces like British Columbia to step up when it comes to actually apportioning asylum seekers.
Eby has since responded to Miller's comments in a statement. He says it's disingenuous to say this is about asylum seekers. Last year, the number of asylum seekers arriving in BC doubled, and we're on track to almost double again this year. I think people in the West are used to the special treatment for Quebec and Ontario, but eventually it gets to be too much. Eby adds that BC's population is growing by over 10,000 people every 37 days and needs federal funding for support. The province, meanwhile, has said it has finalized regulations now for app-based ride-hailing and delivery workers. The new rules will set a minimum wage and a per-kilometre vehicle allowance, ensure workers are covered through WorkSafe BC, and while workers need to have access to the locations and estimated pay linked with the job before accepting it. Also, if they're fired without cause, they have to be given notice or compensation. The province says the rules are the first of their kind in Canada and will come into effect on September 3rd. The BC Federation of Labour argues the new rules don't go far enough, while the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade says it's concerned they will impose new costs on companies. The deadly heat dome that enveloped parts of BC in 2021 was extra brutal on vulnerable people. And a new report by UBC and the UGM finds climate change has its most severe impact on those living on the streets. As Saurabh Sandhu reports, experts say people without homes need better protection as extreme weather events increase.
We could only open the windows like maybe 6 inches or so, like sideways, and then about 3 inches or so like outward. So we got very, very little airflow.
Julianne Cladney says living through the deadly heat dome of 2021 was very tough in her housing project.
It was particularly difficult to manage because of the bars and everything being secured, the windows being secured shut.
Cladney took part in the Summer Connect event hosted by Vancouver's Union Gospel Mission. UGM and UBC's Sustainability Hub partnered on a new report looking at the effects of climate change on people experiencing homelessness in the downtown east side.
We know through this report and its findings that actually through extreme heat and extreme cold, toxic drug deaths go up. And so we know that there's an intersection here of addiction, as well as homelessness, as well as mental health illness, as well as exposure to the elements.
The report highlights 7 key areas aimed at mitigating the impacts of climate emergencies.
Providing people without homes, providing them with cooling kits, providing them with mobile solutions, air filters to deal with wildfire smoke.
It also calls on the City of Vancouver to strengthen its commitment to provide housing and healthcare in the neighborhood. City Council has voted to increase penalties against landlords who fail to uphold a standard of maintenance, including measures to prevent harms caused by heat waves. It plans to ask the province for a Vancouver charter change to make sure landlords don't allow indoor temperatures to go beyond a maximum. When it comes to outdoor protection, Julianne Cladney wants more natural shade.
We could definitely use more trees or like in places where people can access shade and protection from the elements, that sort of way.
One step that could help vulnerable people as extreme weather becomes more common. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
Provincial officials say recent cool, wet weather has helped our wildfire situation here in BC. But conditions could change with the arrival of warmer, drier weather expected in July.
The BC Wildfire Service has put into action equipment, aircraft, and crews to fight new fires and tackle holdover fire hotspots as they resurface.
There are 108 active wildfires burning across the province right now, the majority in the Prince George Fire Centre. 73 of them are holdover fires that have been burning since last year. As the wildfire season wraps up, the province has made changes to evacuee supports as well. People forced to flee will now be able to receive a $200 accommodation allowance available directly via e-transfer or at emergency reception centers.
While evacuees will still have the option of being directly referred to available lodging, this new e-transfer alternative option will allow people who are evacuated to make their own decisions on accommodation, whether that's to stay with family or friends or find a hotel on their own or stay at a campground.
Nelson evacuees faced big challenges finding a place to stay in Fort St. John, with some people sleeping in their cars or driving hours further to reach Prince George. You can get e-transfer support if you create a profile at ess.gov.bc.ca. Time to check weather now with Darius Madavi and a first look at the weather, and you have snowpack information.
I do. We had the snowpack update come out earlier this week, and worth noting, still well below normal, 57% of normal, so 43% below. And I also want to highlight, Dan, I know you mentioned that it is, we've had some cooler and wetter weather recently, but that's mostly been the case on if you're really just on the west side of any mountain range, because all of our precipitation in the last month, or at least the vast majority of it, has come from this westerly flow, which means that even though we have gotten quite a bit of rain, that's helped our drought situation here on the coast and in some parts of the province as well, over in parts of the southern interior. Other places, including the Okanagan and really anywhere just east of any mountains, has not gotten that rain because they're sitting in that rain shadow, which means that even though our drought situation has improved in some places, it has continued to be really bad in places like the Northeast, where they are in that rain shadow, and they're not getting that rain that comes with that westerly flow. So if that continues, then we're going to continue to see the drought situation improve in some places and really worsen in others. And so that's one of the situations that the BC Wildfire Service laid out as not a great situation, something to be keeping an eye on. Now, in terms of the fire danger, this is just today, this isn't an outlook or anything like that, but a little bit of rain has come to some areas up in the northern interior, and that means that even though we have moderate or high fire danger across parts of the north, it has come down temporarily. I would expect it to come back up again in the next couple of days as we dry out a little bit, but there is more rain coming as we get into this weekend. Again, coming from the west, meaning not going to hit everywhere in the province, but any relief is good relief, Dan. And so we'll keep an eye on those conditions as they develop as we head into a warmer and drier stretch after next week.
Okay, Darius, we'll check in later. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Birders and conservationists are asking the city of Surrey to boost protection and enforcement at an ecologically sensitive area near Crescent Beach. Blackie Spit in Boundary Bay is a key stop for dozens of species of migratory birds. But as Rafferty Baker explains, some people appear to be ignoring the rules and trampling all over that delicate habitat.
To the untrained eye, Blackie Spit may not look like much. There are some native grasses and plants, old logs, and a lot of mud in every direction. But for birders with a keen eye,
this spot brings some of the best migratory birds, and there's been 177 species logged alone this year.
Alex Leader and his partner Destiny Gregg come here whenever they can. And the birds do too. It's on a migratory bird path, some flying from Alaska all the way to South America.
They have to stop down wherever there are mud flats. This area has a huge array of mud flats, and it provides fuel for the birds, invertebrate organism, biofuel on the surface, and they fly these incredibly long distances you can't imagine.
The city of Surrey has signs with rules. Stay on the path, stay off the grass and beach. But when Leader and Greg were here on the weekend, they were met with an unfortunate scene.
Tents set up, picnic blankets, lots of people running around. A couple people in the salt marsh, right in there. People on these logs into the grass, directly in the salt marsh.
For local conservationist Mark Cuthbert, it wasn't a surprise to see that kind of crowds in the sensitive area.
You can see how people are looking for other areas. And so they're going into the environmentally sensitive area just to be able to set up their own quiet family activity, right? Or their meal or whatever. But that doesn't mean it's okay.
Cuthbert and Oman have spent decades taking part in the education and restoration of Blackie Spit. But they say it's being threatened by people disregarding the rules.
Everything we do is affecting the health of this area.
Their solution? More enforcement from the city of Surrey.
I'm very sad It's very demoralizing to not see the political will here to allocate resources to protect these beautiful, very, very important places.
The signs are great, but we need more enforcement. And by enforcement, I'm saying that people get fined.
Bylaw enforcement officers do patrol the area. The city knew what time CBC News was going to be at Blackie Spit, and as chance would have it, 2 officers passed through. We spoke to them off camera, and they said they're mostly able to enforce dogs off leash and people partying. But they're able to move people off the sensitive areas. Now, the City of Surrey declined an interview request, but said in a written statement that it encourages people to stay on the pathway at Blackie Spit, and if they see anyone breaking the rules, to call bylaw enforcement. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, Surrey.
A vaccine for syphilis. That's what some UVic researchers are working on. Darius Madavi will tell us more after this. A Vancouver Island microbiologist from UVic is part of a team developing a vaccine for syphilis, a potentially devastating and deadly sexually transmitted disease. Thanks to new funding, they're closer than ever. Our Darius Madavi found out why this vaccine is in the spotlight right now, and he's with us. Darius, syphilis, generally a treatable disease. Why is it vital we have a vaccine for it?
You're absolutely right. Syphilis is very treatable when caught early. If it's allowed to progress, it can cause irreversible damage. It is treatable with many common antibiotics, including penicillin, yet syphilis cases have continued to climb to the highest level in decades in the US and Canada. And according to Caroline Cameron, a microbiology professor at UVic, a big part of that is due to a decline in condom use. Now, syphilis can be nasty for anyone who catches it and doesn't get treated, but particularly for expecting mothers, because the bacterium, which you can see on the screen there, is one of the few pathogens known to be able to cross the placenta, passing from mother to baby. But really, when it comes to syphilis, the challenges aren't just medical.
Stigma plays quite a role in this disease, and so that can lead to people not getting tested, unfortunately, not talking about the disease, and really we just need to consider it as a disease and not have that stigma associated with it.
Syphilis has been plaguing us quite literally for thousands of years, Darius. Why are we just developing a vaccine now?
There are a few big challenges when it comes to studying syphilis or developing a vaccine for it. For one thing, it's just been a really niche field for a long time. Cameron's lab is the only one in Canada studying the bacterium that causes syphilis. But she says new people and new ideas are starting to enter the field. She told me a bit about the exciting work that they're getting up to.
Our lab focuses upon the bacterium and trying to figure out how it causes infection. And so we use that knowledge to guide our vaccine development strategy. If we understand how the pathogen is causing infection, we can figure out ways to try to inhibit that process through vaccination.
Now, when it comes to the bacterium they're studying, the one that causes syphilis, it's a tricky little devil, both for the immune system, fighting it off, and for the people trying to study it in the lab.
So the researchers just secured more funding. What comes now?
Well, even though Cameron and other researchers have done a lot to get towards this, because remember, this is a huge collaborative effort. It's not just Cameron's lab. They've made great strides in developing a syphilis vaccine. It's important to remember that developing a vaccine for a bacterium, especially one as tricky as syphilis, presents unique challenges. Now, unlike a vaccine against a virus, where a single protein usually does the trick, bacteria like syphilis have tricks up their sleeve, swapping out the proteins they use to infect people all the time, which means you need a cocktail of proteins in the vaccine, so your immune system learns to recognize all of them. But as Cameron told me, that presents its own challenges.
We know that one protein is not going to be the magic target here. We need multiple proteins in a vaccine candidate. And for an industry partner, the more proteins they have to produce, the more expensive it is. So we want to just produce a single protein that has this multi-function.
Luckily, they've developed a brilliant solution. They found one core protein that does a pretty good job of training the immune system, but more importantly, it can be easily genetically modified. So using new technology, they can attach scraps of other proteins so the body learns to recognize them all just based off that one structure. Now, that means that syphilis can't just hide one or two proteins and keep infecting the body. It's a huge breakthrough and a real testament to big collaborative research projects.
Darius Madavi, thanks very much for sharing it.
Thank you.
A ceasefire proposal for Gaza has hit a roadblock, with Hamas asking for changes, while the U.S. describes those proposed amendments as unworkable. Next. There are a number of developments today in the war between Israel and Hamas. The United Nations has released 2 reports accusing both Israel and Palestinian groups of war crimes. And as Sasha Petrusik reports, Hamas wants changes to the latest ceasefire proposal.
More than 200 rockets rained on northern Israel. Hezbollah's angry answer to Israeli airstrikes that killed its most senior commander yet. The militant group vowing again to keep intensifying its attacks along the Lebanese-Israeli border as long as Israel's military operations against Hamas continue in Gaza. The U.S. is warning both sides against more attacks in the north.
We don't want to see a wider regional conflict, and that's why we do want to see a de-escalation of tensions in the region.
As for Gaza, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Qatari mediators and blamed Hamas for not accepting a ceasefire proposal presented by the U.S., even though Israel has not publicly backed the deal either.
Hamas has proposed numerous changes.
Hamas reportedly insists that Israeli troops begin a total withdrawal from Gaza immediately if Israel wants hostages released. Hamas is also asking for written U.S. guarantees that any ceasefire would be permanent.
Some of the changes are workable, some are not. But in the days ahead, we are going to continue to push.
Hamas also said part of the problem in reaching a deal is Blinken himself. None of that helps Palestinians struggling with a situation the World Health Organization describes as dire, where aid has been so difficult to deliver.
A significant proportion of Gaza's population is now facing catastrophic hunger and famine-like conditions.
A UN Commission of Inquiry blames both Hamas and Israel for Gaza's plight, accusing both of war crimes in the early days of the conflict. It also says Israel's ongoing campaign amounts to crimes against humanity because of the immense civilian death toll. Israel rejects the findings as biased. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Toronto.
The Prime Minister is headed to Italy today. Justin Trudeau is taking part in an annual G7 leaders summit that begins tomorrow in Rome. On the agenda, development in Africa and artificial intelligence. But as Ashley Burke explains, the wars between Russia and Ukraine, as well as Israel and Hamas, hang over this year's meetings.
The Prime Minister is traveling to Italy on the plane that you can see behind me. He'll be meeting with G7 leaders at a critical time. The wars in Ukraine and in Gaza have cast a long shadow over this year's summit. A former foreign affairs advisor to the Prime Minister says this is a moment of real uncertainty.
Uncertainty about the future of Ukraine, uncertainty about the fate of democracy, uncertainty about major issues like climate change. And so it's really important for these leaders to come together and demonstrate that they can do something in response to these challenges.
A government official said that Canada is involved in a push to try and get G7 leaders to agree to use hundreds of billions of dollars that are sitting in Europe in frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine with its ongoing fight against Russia. But experts also say that while there could be an image of unity projected on that front, that leaders could struggle around the table to come up with a consensus on what's unfolding in Gaza.
There's a number of divergences of views between Europeans and the Americans in particular, but even within Europe. So it will definitely be a challenge for the G7 not to be derailed in some ways by what's going to happen in Gaza and what are post-war plans.
He says that could overshadow Italy's official agenda that includes talking about development in Africa to curb migration and as well artificial intelligence. For the first time, the Pope is going to be taking part in G7 talks. This after he says he was a victim of a deep fake photo, and he has warned against what he calls the perverse dangers of artificial intelligence. He wants countries to sign on to an international treaty to agree to use AI for good and for not evil. As well, a government official said that this summit is happening during a year of elections in the UK, the US, and also across the EU. So there'll be a focus on countering disinformation, on free and fair elections, and as well on foreign interference. This government official said the Prime Minister will be bringing up foreign interference. This after a bombshell report recently alleged that there could be some parliamentarians that have helped foreign countries meddle in Canadian politics, including India and China. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Canada, meanwhile, will face renewed pressure to boost defense spending during next month's NATO summit in Washington. And now, as Murray Brewster reports, one of the country's top business groups is warning Canada faces diplomatic isolation, saying we need to deliver a concrete plan to raise defense spending to NATO's benchmark target.
Talk about an uncomfortable moment.
Canada spends about 1.4% of its GDP on defense. There are, I think, only 5 countries in NATO's 32 that spend less, including Belgium and Luxembourg. How can Canada be a serious partner to the U.S. in every sense if it's not a serious military power?
Well, Matthew, have you read our last defense policy update?
Very, very closely, yes, of course.
The Liberal government has been getting a lot of that when it comes to defense spending, from allies and now at home. One of the country's leading economic voices, the Business Council of Canada, writing the Prime Minister, warning that the failure to produce a plan to meet NATO's defense spending target of 2% of GDP ahead of next month's summit in Washington will have consequences, including diplomatic isolation in both security and economic partnerships.
This is an area where we have been called out. It used to be called out quietly in Washington. Now it's being done very publicly.
The calling out included a recent bipartisan letter from U.S. lawmakers demanding Canada meet its pledge to hit the NATO target.
And if we can see a path towards 2% that's credible, that will go a long way towards strengthening our defense relationship.
Ottawa is investing in defense, saying its latest defense policy will get Canada to 1.76% of GDP by the end of the decade, and that more money is coming once projects are costed and approved.
I'm convinced that we can be on a path to 2%.
To meet the NATO spending target, however, Ottawa would have to spend about $64 billion a year on defense, double what's planned for this year's budget. Aside from the fiscal aspect of doubling the defense budget, there is deep political skepticism. Defense Minister Bill Blair recently said it's hard to convince Cabinet and Canadians that meeting the pledge is a worthy goal. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Pope Francis is being accused again of uttering a homophobic slur. Just 2 weeks ago, the Vatican apologized for the pontiff's use of a highly offensive Italian word that refers to gay men. Now, as Megan Williams reports, he reportedly used the same word in another closed-door meeting.
Pope Francis has been so far the most welcoming Catholic leader to 2S LGBTQ Catholics, which is why last month, when it was leaked that he'd used a gay slur during a closed-door meeting with several hundred bishops, that Catholics were shocked and gay Catholics were angry and hurt. Shortly after, the Vatican issued a statement where Pope Francis apologized for using that offensive term. Then yesterday, he used the exact same term again, this time in a closed-door meeting with several hundred priests here in Rome, saying that the Vatican has an air of gayness about it. He didn't use the word gayness, that's when he used this offensive word. Those present say that he told them that young men with what he called homosexual tendencies, that's Vatican speak for gay, should not enter the seminary. Now, nobody at the Vatican would deny that there's a higher percentage of gay men in the priesthood than in the general population. Studies have backed that up. And the Pope has said that he's worried the high percentage of gay men in the priesthood changes the culture of it, and that it turns away men who aren't gay from entering the priesthood. But 2S LGBTQ Catholics and others say, along with the insulting language, discouraging gay men to enter the seminary is not addressing the issue. It just pushes gay seminarians further into the closet. In contrast to the apology the Pope issued last month, when he used the gay slur, this time the Vatican issued a statement shortly after the news was leaked, and it said only that the Pope had urged those present to use prudence in allowing gay men to enter the seminary. Megan Williams, CBC News, Rome.
Today marks a bittersweet milestone for 60 high school seniors in Newtown, Connecticut. They are survivors of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting massacre 12 years ago that killed 20 of their grade 1 classmates and 6 educators. They graduated from Newtown High School with mixed emotions.
We want to be remembering our friends, and we are going to keep them with us, but it's also something that we wish we never had to deal with.
Compared to some of our classmates when we go to Sandy Hook, our memories of elementary school are weirdly empty, we've blocked out massive parts of it. But it is still graduation, and it is still an exciting day, and we're trying to make sure we put, that feeling first.
The mass shooting at Sandy Hook on December 14th, 2012 was one of the deadliest in American history. The victims were honored at the graduation ceremony today. All the surviving students have become advocates against gun violence since the massacre. One heck of a voyage. A group of paddlers, rowers, and sailors have set off on a journey from Victoria to Alaska. You'll meet a most peculiar set of racers right after this. It is a race not for the faint of heart. Row, sail, or everything in between from the idyllic inner harbor of Victoria all the way to the wilds of Alaska. We checked in with racers to see their mishmash of vessels and found out what makes this journey so special.
On Wednesday at noon, they start off here, Le Mans start from here at the Causeway docks, and they're going to go 700 plus more miles up to Ketchikan. The course runs here out of Victoria north. There's only 2 checkpoints they have to go through. The first is Seymour Narrows, which is a treacherous maelstrom just north of Campbell River, and then they've got to go through Bella Bella. And that is the only 2 places that they have to go. Now, every boat here is required only a few things. They can't have an engine on board, and they can have no support along the way. So that's pretty much the whole rules of Race to Alaska. They're allowed to stay in a hotel, they can go out for a meal, but if they want to win, that's certainly not what they're doing. Some of them will be racing 24 hours a day without stopping. Some of them will be hitting up little towns along the way to reprovision. And also, stuff breaks along the way. We've had teams who have entirely hauled their boats out of the water because their rudders have fallen off and they need to build a new one. Well, the first team across the line, they win $10,000 in cash. That's American cash. Second team across the line, they win a pretty nice set of steak knives.
It's a catamaran. It's built with a rowing system already. It's fitted. You see these special oars. This is a rowing mechanism that you row the regular way, but you go forward, okay? So you see where you're going, unlike regular rowers. Rowing is good, it's fine, but I love sailing, so this is it's a sailing boat. It's a nice, fast sailing boat. I do hope I'll find some wind because I don't want to row all the way to Alaska.
We have this Navy service whaler. It's traditionally propelled by oars. We've got 5 rowing stations. We're only going to be using 4 at a time. And we're only going to really use that when there's no wind. Hopefully we get lots of wind, save our arms, and we'll do a lot of sailing. And we're expecting to be cold, wet, and tired. So if we're not cold or wet or tired, then things are going well.
If you've seen the movie Waterworld, it looks like something out of that. But it's twin hulls with a platform deck on top, and then 2 recumbent bicycle seats front to back in the middle, with like Westphalia style Volkswagen pop-top campers that we can pop up to sleep in, so the boat kind of continues constantly. And when they're lowered, there's rowing stations on top of those, so the people that aren't pedaling can either row or rest and sleep and read a book or make some food.
Always a party on the boogie barge.
There's so many fun things you could do with that.
Oh my
with
gosh.
How loose the rules are.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Except you might drop your oar, you might drop your rudder, as we heard. Would you do that?
I think so, yeah. But I don't think I'd be trying to win. I'd be one of the people stopping at the restaurants and stuff along the way.
Naturally.
Just
hey, calamari.
Stretching it out as long as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How are we doing weather-wise?
Well, not a super nice weekend to be out on the boat unless you're going to be doing it on Sunday, because then we start to lighten up a little bit. The rain is ending a little bit earlier than expected, so that's how it was seeming before. So that's a little bit of good news. Sun should come out late, sort of afternoon Sunday, which you can see here if you take a look over the next couple days. Actually, we're not going to see Sunday here, but over the next 48 hours, tomorrow, beautiful morning, beautiful noontime, beautiful afternoon. Towards the end of the day, we start to see some of that cloud build in for Vancouver, and this is a story for much of the island as well. Cloud coming in and out tomorrow, but mostly sunny tomorrow, just some high cloud probably. Towards the end of the night, some of that lower cloud starts to build in because we do have a showery time coming for most of the island on Friday. So expect a little bit of a wetter one. You might want to wear your rain jacket that day. But on Saturday, we do continue to see that a little bit of that rain, but we start to dry out towards the end of the day. And then by Sunday, we're starting to be dry. So here in southwestern BC, you should see some sunshine, most places at least, by Sunday, by the end of the day probably. Now, across the province though, again, bit of a showery weekend, bit of a breezy weekend, bit of a cool weekend for most people. Temperatures probably going to drop 4 or 5 degrees many places on Friday, so that system rolls through, so be ready for that. But again, maybe some good news in terms of the fire situation, and because things are trending drier and warmer for the end of June and into July, might be the last showery, breezy weekend we have for a while. So enjoy it while it's here. In terms of those winds, again, it will be breezy at times as we get into Friday and Saturday as well. So be ready for that, especially along the strait. For many places, winds could be, these are the consistent wind speeds, not the gusts. So it could be quite gusty at times. So be ready for that. If we take a look at our temperatures, again, nice day tomorrow. Temperatures staying high. Bit of a drop as we get into Friday. On Saturday, those temperatures fall a little bit more in many places, although here in Vancouver, they may start to recover towards the end of the day Saturday, so don't expect the low to be quite as low. And then as we see our conditions across the province, again, lots of sunshine tomorrow, slight risk of a thunderstorm up in Fort St. John, and a little bit of precipitation up in Dease Lake. But other than that, mostly sunny skies and just a little bit of cloud. In terms of a forecast, again, we do have that showery period this weekend, but we do start to lighten up. This is mostly sunny question mark, because probably going to be sunny. Little chance it's cloudy. But
your voice went up a little bit
there?
there?
A while away.
Yeah, sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
The last ship of legendary polar explorer Ernest Shackleton has been found off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. Shackleton died on board in 1922. The Quest, a schooner-rigged steamship, remained in service, though, for decades afterward. As Mark Quinn shows us, it sank more than 60 years ago after hitting ice off the coast of Labrador.
It's a most appropriate name for a famous exploring ship lost at sea for decades, and now finally found, the Quest.
I first said, "What's that?" and then said, "That's it." It was so obviously Quest. It was so obviously a ship.
Sonar identified it just east of Labrador, lying 390 meters below the surface.
Huge amount of excitement throughout the ship. Everyone on our team who was present. You know, it's a sense of euphoria.
The ship's significance is tied to its most famous captain, Sir Ernest Shackleton. He was a prolific explorer of the Antarctic, and he died of a heart attack aboard the Quest while in the South Atlantic in 1922. The ship continued to work at sea and sank 40 years later.
When I discovered that his ship, Quest, the ship he died on, was lying off the coast of Labrador, north of Newfoundland, I was just astonished. And that was the moment I thought, well, we've got to find it.
Finding the Quest has long been a dream of many inspired by Shackleton's own perseverance.
Shackleton's experience in Antarctica is timeless. We'll be talking about it for another 100 years. And the vehicle to do that today, to make it really tangible for everybody, but especially for young people, is visual images of the shipwreck itself.
Geiger says Shackleton lived at a time when the North and South Poles were littered with the bodies of expedition members. But Shackleton himself was the only person to ever die on an expedition he led.
I think it's the fact that he placed human life above his own ego, his own desire to achieve these geographic aims, that really sets him apart from many people of that era.
A century later, 17 hours into their search, the ship he died on is revealed in a ghostly sonar image. The Royal Canadian Geographical Society, which led the search, is planning to return to the site later this year. They're hoping to gather close-up photographs with a remotely operated submersible. Mark Quinn, CBC News, St. John's.
An iconic team with legendary moments. After the break, two former Vancouver Canucks talk about the magical 1994 Stanley Cup run.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. CBC Vancouver is the exclusive media partner of the 2024 Indian Summer Festival, July 4th to the 14th. The festival showcases over 80 artists across a spectrum of arts, from live concerts to discussions and visual arts displays. Tickets at indiansummerfest.ca. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter and keep connected with us.
This week, 30 years ago, Vancouver was cheering on the Canucks in the Stanley Cup final against the New York Rangers.
The Canucks didn't win that cup, sadly, but the 1994 team had some iconic moments like the save made by Captain Kirk McLean in Game 7 overtime against the Calgary Flames.
Roberts moves it ahead to Fleury. Here he comes with Reichel. Fleury for Reichel. Great save by Kirk McLean.
Well, that's exciting to watch even now.
There you go.
Yeah. The early edition host, Stephen Quinn, spoke with McLean and left winger Jeff Courtnall. They talked about what made that team work.
And the way we came back and won every game in overtime, it just gained momentum, gave us confidence with time. And I think that the team just continued to get better every round.
Listen, we had I don't want to say a lunchbox type of team, but we had great work ethic. We always had superstars on the team. Pavel and Jeff coming into his own, Trevor, and the list goes on, and we could really bring pretty much everything to the game.
Then after that, we had lots of games that were so close, and to come back all the time and win in overtime. I think Kirk always, the greatest thing is that goaltending is key, as you're seeing again in the playoffs this year. Kirk gave us a chance to win every night. We knew we could take risks because he would be there to make the big saves if we turned the puck over. And I think that was how we had success.
Awesome run. One goal, it was 3-2 by the end for New York, but they had amazing players. It was a good time to be alive. Ask anybody who was there.
Good time to be alive.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, the free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
Tanya Fletcher will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Have a good night.